don't have to hear me burping and farting. You got that part though.
Okay, so, Mr. Flock, what was your position in law enforcement?
I was a sergeant, a patrolman, started out as patrolman and sergeant, and retired about 8 years ago, doing criminal investigative work and narcotics work.
Okay, so do you believe that the funding for the criminal justice system in Lyons, New York was good enough, or do you feel like there should be higher funding?
Well, I guess looking at funding, there's different areas of funding, and if you're talking about for Lyons, I mean, early 90s we did a study for New York State, come down to a study of our police department based on our calls of service, based on our volume of population and et cetera. And at that time they said we should have 17 full-time officers, and at that time I think we had 10 or 11. We never got any extra officers. We had a couple part-timers that were available to us, but if you're talking about funding for local, for the officers, I think that that's always been a problem in the small municipalities, that you just can't get enough money to pay because of the rising costs of healthcare and whatnot that affect the small communities that can't afford to pay that. So I guess if you're looking at individual budgets and small communities budgeting for the positions, yeah, there's definitely a lack of funding, and you know, it's there, but you can only ask the taxpayers to dig in their pockets so far.
So, with the funding in that, now that counties are starting to take over the police agencies, do you feel like that's going to help the funding? And also, do you feel like it's a good thing that the counties are starting to take over the police agencies?
As far as the funding, I think it's helpful because you have less hands reaching into that pot looking for money. If you're familiar with the grant process or you're familiar with funding process, you know, the state adopts the budget and so much money is allocated for different programs, and some are law enforcement related. So if you have less people dipping into that pot, it's easier to be more localized as far as their funding. It's countywide as opposed to, you know, village-wide. So, for instance, we have all the communities in Wayne County reaching out for funding, because everybody does every year, and it's harder to get that funding as an individual than it is if a bunch of municipalities got together and sought that money together. So I think the consolidations of the counties taking over is helpful as far as the funding. As far as it being a good idea, you know, that's yet to be determined. I like the thought process behind it because it brings everybody together as one, and we're breaking down some of the little barriers. For my, 25 years in law enforcement, there's certain PDs that don't work well with other PDs. When you start eliminating them and making it a county, it's easier to work with each other because you take away some of the rivalry or some of the competition for grants and stuff like that locally. So that, I think it's a positive. The negative part about it is the county taking over, the officers may not necessarily be familiar with individuals or individual businesses, where us as a small community, we used to have our officers walk the street every night, check the doors, so they got to know the business owners, they got to know everybody in the community, where the sheriffs, they're in, handle the complaints. Some of them during the day are walking, but you lose a little bit of the personality stuff, the individuals knowing each area. When you go to a county, you may get somebody that's not from Lyons, or very rarely works this way, that doesn't know the people or doesn't know the business owners or the normal. Mm-hmm. So it sometimes can cause a little bit of friction in that area. But.
So in Lyons, when you were on duty, do you feel that the punishments for small and large infractions on the law, where you think they were enforced, or do you think that they weren't enforced well enough, and do you feel that they were severe enough or too severe?
You're talking from the court system?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, there was always a saying in our you know, most of my career was spent doing narcotics or narcotics education through DARE, but most officers would always say to you that there's more justice in a traffic ticket than there is anything else, because pretty much the fines are set, and you plead guilty, and you know if you get a speeding ticket or you get a inspection ticket, you're going to go and pay $165 with surcharges and whatnot. So personally, I think the fines were a little high for the state of New York, but that's how the state generates some of the money. On the opposite end, on the criminal end, I don't think the punishments were enough. A lot of times we would spend, just to say on an individual case that we're working for narcotics, we would spend, I don't know, $6,000-7,000 on a case for putting it together, overtime, and you know, throughout the investigation, court time to go to court, and sometimes these guys are getting 6 months and 5 years probation out of it, which, you know, really is not something that's teaching them. And I think the state's kind of changed their process a little bit. They're looking more for the education stuff as opposed to locking people up. But it's good on this hand, but on this hand, they're cutting programs and funding for the DARE program and stuff that are community minded for those that are struggling with addiction or whatnot. So it's a double-edged sword.
So with that, you said you worked in narcotics. What do you feel that in Lyons, New York, is the biggest problem facing the community on a criminal justice law standpoint?
Well, it's definitely the drugs. You know, with the rise of heroin in the last couple of years, I mean, Lyons doesn't have as much of it. It is here, and it is growing. But crack cocaine has pretty much been, since late 80s, the drug of choice. And we've had a lot of people that, because of our orchards and the migrant workers coming in and out, we get a big influx of people that are not normal residents yearly. So, you know, that drug trade is easier continued because of these people coming in and out, and they get hooked on it. So,
what do you believe could be done to reduce the amount of drugs and selling and using in Lyons or anywhere around here?
Well, punishment is always a good thing, but we have to look at the education process and, you know, maybe cut off some of the fundings, I think, of families that are on social services that are using their money and selling their food stamps and whatever to get drugs. We need to work on that. And you know, I think the bottom line is we need more direct enforcement on it. You know, not necessarily on the narcotics end, but on the ends such as those that are getting arrested that are, you know, selling drugs on the streets every day, but yet they're collecting a check from the welfare department, and their rent's being paid from the welfare department. So there's so many different areas, but I think drugs can be combated a little bit better with some more people and looking at different ways to fight it. But for years it's been throwing money at the wind, because you know, one person gets addicted, they get the next person addicted and the next, and it's like a big snowball effect. And you know, it's hard to play catch up. For most of my years here, we had very little enforcement for probably my first 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then we finally convinced the community that we had a bigger problem than what everybody thought was there. And so our enforcement beefed up over the years, and you know, we tackled some of the problems. And the bottom line was we were driving the dealers to Clyde or Savannah or Sodas, where there's less officers, not full-time departments. So I don't think it helps. It's just dispersing the problem someplace else, and it becomes another community's burden. So back on the first question we talked about, or one of the first questions, the sheriff's department's taking over. That's part of the benefit, because they may see this person dealing in Lyons, and now they're working a job in Sodas, and they see this person, so they gain some familiarity with them there. But you know, it's not a perfect scenario, but it may help.
Do you see the drug problem getting better in the next few years, or do you think that'll become worse?
I think the heroin epidemic, it will take over most of the communities because it's cheap, it's easy to get, and it's so highly addictive that people are going from the opioids to heroin. And you know, most you talk to anybody that's getting prescribed medicine from a doctor, it's some of the opioids that start them that have that desire to get high or have that high, so now they go to heroin for $10 a bag instead of a $20 crack rock, you know, that lasts them 10 minutes of a high. Now they're going to the heroin, and they can get twice as much, and you know, so I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Well, that is all my questions for this interview, so thank you very much for everything, and have a good day.
All right, thanks, you're welcome.